There is a commitment to maintain food production, and we have objectives to improve farm productivity overall, where improvements in farm productivity in England over the last, let's say, 10 years have not matched other sectors and have not matched other countries, and we want to change that. So that's where the investment in innovation, etc., is important, and also the design of the schemes is important so they can contribute to both outcomes. In terms of modelling the impacts, we published a very detailed compendium of all the evidence we had when we were passing the legislation for all of this in 2019. And we publish data all the time about the industry. If you look on gov.uk, you'll see there's absolutely stacks of data coming out, and we monitor it all the time. And the basic premise is that there will be some areas of land where there is an opportunity to improve productivity and increase production, and some areas of land where best will in the world is too wet, slopey, difficult to farm, whatever, and actually be much better in a scheme, and you can make a stable profit. And in your business, you've then got some scheme income, which is roughly stable and predictable, and some productivity income, which is a bit more volatile. What the government have said is there's huge amounts of pressure on land use, aren't there? It's not just about food and nature, there's also energy and housing and public amenity, etc. And there isn't enough land to meet everybody's objectives for all those things. And what the government have said about that is that they'll produce a land use framework setting out how they propose to manage those different trade-offs. And that's a piece of work I don't lead on, but which we are very closely aligned to. What we try to do in our schemes and our policies is achieve as much as we possibly can through multifunctional land use, so producing food and also protecting watercourses and also producing for biodiversity. And then after that, as much as possible through not very productive corners and edges and hedges and that kind of stuff. And then only after that, have land taken out of production where that's really necessary and appropriate for that particular land, because it's not going to be productive with the best one in the world ever anyway. So that's the overall model, but there's all sorts of complexity in that in terms of every single decision that you make. And we have to, when we advise ministers, we always advise them about the impact on farmers, the impact on cost and value for money, the impact on that range of outcomes, and the impact on our ability to deliver. And there's always a balance of considerations across those things. And that's what ministers are there for, to make those decisions. I've got tracking, I've just moved to weekly, on SFI as to which actions are being undertaken over what area of land, by which farms in terms of size and type of operation, in what combinations, how many actions are people doing, etc. And we're watching that all the time, and we report that into ministers. So we're not seeing that in the data, but we are aware that there's quite a few people talking about that worry, and that's something that we've got our eye really closely on. And if needed, you could, in CS, we have limits on how much of your farm you can put in particular actions. We haven't done that in SFI because the whole basis of this is we're saying, you know what the best things to do are on your farm, you decide what to do. And we don't want to introduce restrictive rules excessively. However, that you've just mentioned is something we've got under review because you do have to make proper use of the budget. So it's always about balance. We've had this division, haven't we, between farming and environmental action. So some of the things that we're doing on trees and woodland that we've announced in January, things like agroforestry, wood pasture, etc., do allow that integration between farming and woodland. There's a potential trade-off, isn't there, between the sorts of things that you might grow for the purposes of commercial wood production and the sorts of things you might do for the environment. And it's all about, again, finding the right balance so you can do both. That's why we're trying to get a more integrated approach on things like agroforestry. And that's why we're trying to get a more flexible approach in the woodland schemes, where you get a payment for doing a certain amount of tree planting, for example, but you can get premiums if you do it in a way that's particularly beneficial for the environment. So you don't have to do it that way, but if you do, you get more money. So it's a bit more like that sort of flexibility that we're trying to introduce. We work very closely in partnership across Natural England, Forestry Commission, Environment Agency, and RPA in particular. And everybody is wanting to try to take a better, more nuanced approach. But we do have these objectives we're trying to meet for the environment and climate as well as food production and farm productivity, and they're finely balanced. On water quality and management, both of those are really high priority. We've just seen, haven't we, in the last 2 or 3 months, the extent of damage to productivity and the environment that you can have if we don't manage drought and flood in a more effective way as they become potentially more extreme over time. So that is very much in the minds of ministers and our teams to see what else can we do in schemes that will allow us to manage those risks, both from the perspective of individual farms and their ability to produce reliably and be profitable, etc., and good for the environment, but also strategically, nationally, we need to be able to adapt to these changes in weather, don't we? So that is something we very much bake in. And that's the sort of thing, along with developments in science, developments in how we understand people to be applying these things, that we have to keep under review through this regular cycle of review of actions that I'm talking about, because it might be that it becomes really clear that there's some particular things we can pay for beyond the 50 new things that we've just identified, or that we've introduced something for ditches, but it's not quite designed right and we're not seeing the uptake and we need to adjust it. And that's exactly the sort of issue that we've got to take on board when we do that. For some farms, it will be more profitable and appropriate and a better business model for you to put quite a bit of your land into schemes, whether that's in-field actions or round-the-side type actions. Other farms, probably not so much, and that's fine. You decide, it's your business, you decide what you want to do. We're trying to make schemes attractive enough to get the right level of uptake in the right places and the things we want to see. But there are different models for different folk. The government's view is, it's not for the government to say what you should do on your farm.